Okay, everyone, it's 5 past. I think that's enough time for people to join. One of our trainers is just rebooting his laptop, so he'll be joining shortly. But let's open for today. So welcome, first and foremost, to everyone who's here. And really, so the topic of this free webinar is healing relationships and why it's so hard to move beyond the pain. So just a brief introduction. So some of the people joining today's call may be familiar. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. So some of the people here may be familiar with Wiselife Academy. But for those who aren't, just a brief primer as to sort of what Wiselife Academy does. So our tagline is that we look to transform knowledge into positive change. And sort of the offering here is really to take Islamic and human wisdom and to synthesize and combine them into practical, meaningful, and applicable training, such as what we're offering today, really intended to expand human potential and inspire radical personal growth to really help yourselves, so the people on today's call, like be able to be well equipped to solve life's challenges. So as part of that, we have expert trainers, so such as the ones we're joined with today. And really, the idea is to, again, sort of take a universal Islamic principles and also deliver them with also cutting edge scientific research and psychology to provide yourselves with a strong foundation for your own personal development. So please bear in mind with me as we're going through this the seminar today. I will be letting people in, but just a brief introduction to our speaker, our trainers on the call today. So we have Harun Dabbagh on the call. Harun is a self-development coach who spent the last 5 years working with schools, academies, and institutions teaching personal development from both Islamic and secular traditions. Having studied 7 years at an independent Islamic school, Harun went on to complete his theoretical physics degree at King's College in University of London. And he's completed further Islamic studies with various teachers who are foremost in the topics of prophetic character. Prophetic character, prophetic sayings, the hadith, and spirituality. Harun continues to study and is undertaking a practical course of prophetic self-development under the guidance of various contemporary scholars. He's also worked professionally at the Cabinet Office, at BP and Royal Dutch Shell, and more recently has transitioned into the technology and social media space, having worked at the likes of Google, Meta, which owns Facebook, and upcoming move to TikTok, specializing in marketing and technology. The final thing to say here is that Harun is a qualified mental health first aider and has conducted a number of mental health awareness sessions, both King's College London and the London School of Economics. So that's a brief introduction to Harun, who we'll have on the call today, and just an outline for myself as well. So my name's Imran Khan. I work in the city as well, just like Harun. And as a background, I'm a qualified chartered accountant, graduating from London School of Economics. I've spent almost 10 years in the audit industry, working across two consulting firms, Ernst & Young and PwC, where until I recently made a move a few years ago into risk management, where I'm currently working at the London Stock Exchange Group. Outside of that, I also have a passionate interest in psychology, and I trained part-time in the field of psychosynthesis counseling. So now I'm currently qualified as a counselor, and I operate in that field outside of work, where I support both Muslims and non-Muslims. So that's really just a brief primer and introduction to who we've got on the call today. And the format for today will be a talk show, sort of like a podcast format, right? So we want to keep it interactive. We want to keep it relevant to yourselves, right? So there's a chat function. If everyone can see it in the bottom right, there's like a little speech bubble that you can enter in questions and type in, and I'll do my best to sort of where we can answer them and pose them on the talk today. So give me 1 second. Perfect. And the other thing to mention is that today's offering is it's a taster of a full day seminar that we're running in London on the 18th of May. Saturday, I believe, let's check. It's Saturday the 18th of May from 10 till 5 at Regent's University in London. So if you find benefit from today and if you're interested to sign up, we also have details at the end that we'll share, and there's a discount available for people attending today, and there's a special code we can share. Okay, so without further ado, I think that was more than enough of an introduction. So now the topic, healing relationships, why it's so hard to move beyond the pain. Okay, so many of us, if not all of us, have experienced or at least witnessed a relationship that hasn't necessarily gone the way we wanted, the way we planned, ranging from possibly being out of touch with someone in our lives, maybe over a small disagreement that we can't quite remember, to more extreme cases of like a permanent fallout with a friend, or estrangement from like a loved one, like a sibling, a parent, or a divorce from a spouse, or maybe there was a marriage proposal that didn't quite work out. And what we might find that we're left with is pain, frustration, regret. And in the mix of that, there may be a desire to teach someone a lesson, right? By the way we respond, by the way we handle the relationship. But beyond that, there may be a desire to heal. So, in that mix of things, how can we practically navigate this for ourselves? Like, should we always reconcile? Should we be the first to apologize? How can we balance the Quranic advices of maintaining ties or forgiving others when in reality it might seem too hard? So, these are some of the themes we're going to look at today. And as I mentioned, it's interactive. So, please share your questions using the chat function. And we'll do our best to get through them in in the time we have. So without further ado, I'll open out to I'll hand over to Harun to talk a little bit more.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So, assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi everybody, and thank you for joining the webinar. I think thank you, Imran, as well, for opening up the topic. Yeah, as Imran mentioned, this is a taster for a full-day workshop that we have in Regent's University in about 2 weeks' time, if I'm not mistaken, on the or whenever. My calendar's all over the place. But yeah, it will be in London, and we'll be going through really unpacking this epidemic, which I think everybody faces a point in which they, have fallen out with an employer, or employee, or colleague, or friend, and we end up carrying that baggage within other relationships, or carrying it with just within us, and it's like really dragging an anchor along. So hopefully today we're going to explore a little about, and also really would love to pick Imran's brain as a newly qualified counsellor who deals with situations on a day-to-day basis. It would be really great also to get insight into some of the common challenges and also some of the techniques that we can implement within ourselves on how we can start that healing process, and what does a healing process even look like. I think that would be great to kind of touch on as well. So just a little bit back from me, back to Imran in terms of whatever questions that you think. I think there's some chat, people have put some stuff through the chat. I'm not sure if that's relevant, but
cool. Yeah, so I'll keep an eye on that. Thanks, Harun. So I guess maybe if we start from sort of the beginning. So I mentioned a few examples of like what relationships might end up in the way that we might want, right? So for example, maybe let's something that possibly started small, yeah, like a disagreement, but it led to quite, say, like a painful fallout, whether it's with a friend, whether it's, in more close case, like with a sibling or a parent, um, or even with, like I mentioned, like a spouse. So, oh, am I getting some feedback? Again, just a request, whoever's joining, if you're able to go on mute, that would be perfect. Um, so one of the questions, possibly if we start with maybe the first one, family, right? Often we might get into a situation where someone cuts ties with us, and yet on one side we might have heard like Islamic advice or guidance, for example, to at least give salam or to keep in touch, like every so often. I think there's like a reference to should it be every 3 days or not. So in the case of that being the case, um, what should we be expected to do realistically and practically as well? So when we have the Islamic guidance, yes, someone absolutely doesn't want anything to do with us, particularly in the case of family. What's a practical way to navigate that? Trying to stay true to our Islamic advice and identity, but at the same time navigating the practical difficulties of how much a person wants to engage with us or not.
Yeah, so I mentioned this is a quite common situation, and I think we find ourselves in different aspects of our lives where someone's wronged us, and we don't really want to sustain a relationship with them. So the first thing to mention is, at least within Islamic context, there's a hierarchy of relationships, and the hierarchy of relationships is determined by kind of those relationships that have rights established between them, and those relationships have less rights. So in this case, one's family have a different set of rights to one's friends, which is a different set of rights to someone who is in your community, like a neighbor. Has a different set. A neighbor will have a different set of rights to somebody who generally lives in the locality. So the first thing is to understand the differentiation between this, because depending on the set of rights, there's a level or the rules apply differently. In simple terms, the concept within Islamic tradition that you're referring to about maintaining relationships is called silat raham. Silat raham literally means to join times of raham comes from the word womb, so it's really referring to blood ties, family, and that's where this rule applies, which is that one should not cut family relations, and cut means entirely, zero contact, absolute, if you bump into them, it's ignoring, etc. And that's a full cut. Joining ties can be as small as, like you said, when you see somebody, it's just, give them hello or salam and bye. But at least there's something there. It's cordial, as they would say. It's not sour or damaging. So that's the first thing to establish, that actually this rule that you're referring to applies mainly within the family. Friends and colleagues, people can lose friends for good reasons, like if someone is harmful, etc., you can get new friends. But family are relationships in which are divinely chosen, which is we don't have a say about who our brother, sister, our uncle, or auntie is, or who our parents are or our children are. That's divinely determined. Friends you pick, so that's a different set of rules. That you can get new friends, but family you can't just replace a brother, for example, or replace a sister or parent. So that's the first thing to mention. The second is, as you mentioned, the other extreme, which is, okay, I can't cut this person, but maybe they're very damaging to me. They're very toxic. They have bad behaviors or habits or destructive habits that affect my emotional and physical and psychological well-being. So then what do I do then? I clearly can't throw myself back into a cage with somebody who might harm me. So here, especially in the secular context, because there isn't a rule per se of having to maintain family ties, it doesn't differentiate family and friends, maybe in the way that Islamic tradition does. In our understanding, at least, we also have a principle of not being harmed by the same person twice. And this is from a prophetic saying that a believer is never bitten by the same hole twice, meaning that you should learn from an experience. If you've been defrauded by somebody, then it's probably not wise to get into business with them. If someone has been unfaithful to you, then it's probably unwise to be put in a position where they can still continue that behavior, etc. So there's also that part, which is, okay, not jumping into the same place where you got burnt before. especially if it's repetitive behavior. So I think in the middle, it's important to understand what is the middle. And the middle is knowing the skill of how to first, before joining ties with somebody, and before before jumping to the extreme of cutting, actually first dealing with the emotional state that you're in first, because there's wisdom behind doing something. There's wisdom behind joining ties with somebody, and it doesn't start with joining ties. That doesn't solve the issue. If anything, that probably grate you inside. The first thing is to deal with the aftermath of whatever that relationship has left you in. So if someone has, let's say, done something wrong to you, first knowing how to release that emotion from you, which is, okay, they've harmed me, and I'm reminding myself this person's done this to me. If you're constantly going to be in that state where you're reminding yourself, and that you build up that anger, you build up that eventually becomes a grudge or hatred, then no wonder why it's going to be impossible to conceive the idea of having a cordial relationship, because your state isn't there yet. So the first thing to address is your state. Then you can start to address it. Okay, how do you, after you've removed a grudge, okay, fine, how do I now then navigate and manage that relationship? And there's 3 types of ways you can do that, which we'll touch on, I suppose, maybe a little bit later.
Okay. Thanks, Harun. So that's quite helpful, because again, often like when we have a problem, and I see this in the counseling space, right, we want to jump to, well, how do I sort that person out?
Yeah.
So like as in, and I can speak from experience of being a counselor that like usually like in the counseling space, they say that the only person you really have power over to change is yourself, right?
Yeah.
Often it's a bit of a fallacy, like it's a bit of a trick almost, like that we think that my life will be a lot better if only I could change this person, or this person changes. And it is a bit of a trick, because we end up going down this spiral and we invest a lot of energy in that, when really like true change and guidance is from Allah, right? Like as in when it comes to other people. But I think it was quite helpful where you said that. So almost like before, and you mentioned the differentiation between family and friends, but looking at our own emotional state as well. And just on that, I mean, so there's a comment that came in, which is just pointing towards that. Particularly in the case of family relationships, there may be times where, for example, like a parent passes away, and then the dynamics that unfold after that, if I'm understanding it properly, but it's sort of mentioning around how people's sort of true intentions might come out when maybe like a respected figure in the family might sort of not be there anymore. I know in the case of certain families that they may only get together when the grandparents are alive, but then after the grandparents are gone, they might sort of not have the intention to meet, or feel like that layer of policing is now not there anymore, right? Again, like again, it's interesting, but again, what I hear is to check in with yourself, right? Sort of, where are you at emotionally? Are you in a sensible place to deal with the situation before trying to just go straight in and go for those people that you're trying to change? On this point as well, I wanted to kind of ask, so if sometimes I hear in the case of this that it affects my mental health engaging with this person. So what, like, if it's gonna hurt me, like, or make me lose my calm or temper, like for example, that person it hasn't processed their own individual space, and take an extreme version of that say there's a risk of like abuse, right, if a person re-engages with someone. So what's the the path of that person should engage with if they fear some degree of harm themselves from engaging with someone, and if it's a family tie, they know that they should maintain the tie, but there's a risk of harm.
No, that's a really good question, and particularly that's what makes it tricky with family, which is it's not as simple as like you can change your friends. You might have to maintain a relationship there, but then what you need to balance is, how do I protect myself? So there are 3 ways, and we will discuss this in a lot more detail in the seminar, but as an overview, I'll give you an idea. So there's 3 ways that you can empower yourself. The first is physical distance, and that's probably the most understood, which is how do I create physical space between me and this person so that I'm not within their space to be harmed, as an example. So in the case of physical abuse, there's a clear red line there, and that's not acceptable in any terms. But in others, more which are more psychological or to do with what person says, etc., like if it's verbal abuse, etc., then physical space is important. Now I appreciate that's not always easy if living in the same household, and knowing how to do that in your context is an important part. And that's where a mentor or a counselor or a coach can look at an individual context and say, okay, these are the levers you have to play with to maybe develop some space, or consider being a little bit more independent, or making a move to be independent. So for example, let's say a classic case that I've come across is newly married couple struggling with in-law issues, and out of preference they're living with family. But if it's causing there's such toxic behaviors or clashes, then actually it might cost you more, but you'll have more peace of mind if you stand on your own 2 feet, which is on the table. And so that's a very easy upfront solution in that case, in that example. So there's a piece around how physical distance definitely helps. That's why they say that long distance relationships with family always are better, because you see less of each other. So there's less reason to fight, there's less reasons to get into conflict, less reasons to. Whereas when you're in someone's space, then it's just a matter of time before something happens. So that's the first thing. I think that one's probably most understood. It's just applying it in someone's context. The other two are the more interesting ones. So you could move away from somebody, but that person's still living rent-free in your brain. What they're saying or have said to you is still affecting you. What they're saying to the wider family might be still affecting you. What they're saying to your husband or wife, I'm just using this in-law example, but let's just say I just hear the in-law example most often, unfortunately. But let's say there's many other examples where it could be for a friend circle, whomever. So what do you do about that? Okay, you've taken the physical distance, but especially with the advent of technology, things get around quickly, right? It's not as simple as back before, I imagine, Facebook or social media happened. If you wanted to distance yourself from somebody and be untraceable, you only needed to move one area away, or a few roads. But now with everything being published, you probably find somebody very quickly. So I think there it's called the second level of distance is called to mentally empower yourself. And to mentally empower yourself, really, as human beings, we place expectations on people that shouldn't be there, and that causes us to feel harm, or feel a sense of grief or remorse or grievance. So for example, if I believe that I should always receive good behavior from people, or that the people closest to me should understand me, or the people closest to me know me, right, or should know me, or have concern for me, then the issue is actually with my expectations. The issue isn't with people, as in, yes, they might be doing wrong, that's fine, but people are imperfect by nature. So to have perfect expectations is also quite dangerous, and to manage and reprogram those and place them in the right places. The expectation is not wrong, but where it's placed is wrong, which is that doesn't exist with any human being. The nicest of human beings, no matter how lovely they are, there's always going to be imperfection there. We're created as fallible beings, not infallible. So knowing how to migrate and reprogram those ideas that we have, like why is it that we react so heavily when, say, a family member says something versus a stranger? Because inbuilt in that is that we believe that the stranger doesn't know us. So it's neither here or there. But if a family member says it, well, there's an expectation that they should have known us. And it's really the shortfall of that expectation is where anger is generated, because when things don't go to what we plan or what we expect, then it creates an emotional response. And there's a saying that the higher the wall of expectations, the greater the fall. So knowing what expectations are healthy and also knowing where to place them is a key part. So that's to do with mental empowerment, knowing how to place these types of thoughts that we might tell ourselves or not know that we have within us, how to place them in the right place, which is with the divine. And that we will unpack in the seminar. And then finally is we said physical distance, mental distance. The third is spiritual, to be spiritually empowered. And that is basically the idea that nobody can harm you, right? Nobody can harm you except with God's permission. provided that you've taken the means to protect yourself, and that you rely on God, and provided that you don't go, or for example, you don't go low. If someone goes low, you don't go low. If you go low, then this rule doesn't apply anymore, which is, yeah, you can be harmed. But if the idea that it's a famous dua that we recite as well, Allahumma la mani'a lima atayt wa la mu'ti'a lima mana'ta. It's a dua that we say after the prayer, after every prayer actually, which is paraphrasing, if everybody came to harm you and God didn't intend harm from you, nobody can harm you. And if everybody came to save you and God intended harm from you, nobody can protect you. But that's the conditions to that. It's not like a blind belief. The conditions are that you are within the confines of goodness, meaning that you don't go low. If you don't go low and you maintain your position, your moral position, and then God's help and God's protection, and that means nobody. It's also the belief that nobody can really dishonor you truly. Honor God. Nobody can truly take anything from you, because money, it is, that also sits with God. So what we think we need to defend, actually in reality, these are things that are decided by God, and God can, that's within Islamic tradition, Islamic framework. It's very empowering, because that means that I don't need to go low. When I believe I have to fight for every, my honor, and this person's dishonored me, then it's going to be a very taxing life, because I'm constantly going to be under defense. It's like, I don't have time for that. And secondly, I truly believe that if others dishonor you, then reality is God is the one who honors people and dishonors people. People don't decide that. One minute they love you, next minute that you don't. So it's a cheap currency. So I don't, really it sits with God, not with people. And actually that frees you from people. And when you have this mindset, because otherwise you become enslaved to the perceptions and what people do and say, etc. So that's the third thing, and we explore again in the seminar that we're going to be covering in more detail. How do you actually apply these? And we'll go through them in a bit more detail. So we call the 3 layers of empowerment. How do you empower yourself to keep distance, to mentally keep distance, and to spiritually empower yourself so that you can manage that relationship? That way, any harm that comes, you've already prepared yourself, so you know how to manage that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think yes, and there's again, that's just an insight into just how much is there that we can be mindful of, right? When navigating challenging relationships. And I like how you sort of separated between sort of the practicalities of physically distancing yourself, but then, like you say, there may be the mental, people living sort of rent free, and particularly in the age we live in now, right? Like I said, where like it's not just a case of seeing someone in public to not be reminded of them. You can see them on social media. You can see posts that they're making, living where they're living their life maybe without you in it, or vice versa, right? And that can be challenging, right? So let me so one of the other things we just wanted to ask on this, I guess sort of in relation to that, because again, sort of where I've seen it is and I have seen instances of where sort of physical distance creates benefit. I'm also mindful of, like I just mentioned, the sort of the changing social norms. For example, the high rising impact of social media, which is kind of challenging the traditional construct of how we navigate relationships, how we keep in touch. Are we expected to keep in touch more because it's so easy now, like at the drop of like a text message? I think COVID was an interesting time as well, because people are sort of locked in their homes and they had nothing but their screens, right? So then, but at the same time, that being a mode to interact with people that you maybe hadn't got in touch with for a long time, or maybe had fallen out with, it's time to think about that. The other side was the sort of the effect it had on people living with each other, right? And it kind of brought to the surface just sort of what it's like to not, to be in relationship with another. There were cases of husbands and wives who lived together for years, but when they were actually forced to do it and they had no other option, it brought a new aspect of their relationship out. And just the other thing I was just reflecting on, you mentioned, was around again, in terms of like the navigating it spiritually as well. The thing I was thinking about was, or that came to mind, is that like one of the tactics of Shaitan is that if he can't get a person like directly, he'll go through them, like through other people, basically to get to them.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, a lot of food for thought there. We're getting just a couple of questions I want to pick up on the chat. One of them is maybe aware, but some people so I'm not aware of this, but possibly yourself, or we can bring it in the course as well, Harun. So the story about people who are insulting one of the Sahaba, Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anh, in front of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I can't see, it says yeah, it's probably just an anecdote that's being shared there, but presumably
I'm familiar with their story, and I'm happy to mention it. And it's actually mentioned in the course. So it is actually to the third point that I mentioned about empowering yourself spiritually, which Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he demonstrated. So once he was standing and a man was assailing him, and the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was observing, he was witnessing this event, and Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he kept quiet. He didn't respond to this man, and then the man, and then eventually he responds. After some time, he responds and says, "And on to you," meaning whatever the person was saying to him, he said, back to you." He then kind of sells him back, and at this point, then the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he leaves, meaning he sees this and he just leaves. And then the Prophet, then Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he's a little bit disturbed by this because he thought, okay, I was quiet, the Prophet was watching, but then the minute I responded back in the manner that the man was responding to me, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam left. So he goes to the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam after, and he says, "Ya Rasulullah, you know, why did you leave when I responded?" And he said, "Because when you didn't respond, an angel came and descended, and it defended your honor. And when that man was assailing you, that angel was responding on your behalf and saying, 'And on to you, and on to you.' And so when you responded, the angel then left, and then I left." Meaning that the idea is that because we believe in God, we believe in the unseen, we believe in the system of God. That when one doesn't go low, then Allah's defense comes upon that person. But when you then go low, you then leave the confines of Allah, and then therefore then you can be subject to harm. So that's the idea, and that's actually one of the stories that explains and demonstrates this point very clearly, that honor these matters are with Allah. So we shouldn't threat over it and take it. Seek to avenge what we consider or see as loss, and a testament of that is, you know, the whole seerah of the Prophet ﷺ is, you know, the first 12 years are extremely difficult, sanctions and dishonoring, and the poetry that was written against the Messenger of God, and all the things that would happen, and then at the end of it, the conquest of Makkah comes. Same with Yusuf alayhi salam, is, you know, backstabbed by his brothers, thrown in a well, sold into slavery, falsely accused of rape, and then he's a king. So honor never lies with the people, right? God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it lies with Allah. So we shouldn't seek to take or earn that from people.
Yeah, subhanallah. Yeah, again, one of the things I'm just reflecting on there is just, and I see in the counseling space as well, where sometimes like an individual might over focus on their ability. So, you know, I talked about sort of what can you truly change, right? And if you can't change someone else, at least sort of look at yourself. But then there's a risk of over relying on that, thinking that I have to achieve this, or I have to attempt to do this in order to achieve change, or the way I want something to be. And there's a lot of eyes in that, right?
Yeah.
And then the person might not appreciate. Just the way I tend to frame it is, you can only do so much and do that, right? Because we have the concept in Islam of tying our camel, right, in terms of but then we forget that the bit to rely on Allah as well, right? So it's almost like you're running a race, and you do your bit, you do the preparation, you physically exert yourself, you put your best effort in, but then the outcome of the race is with Allah, right? And if you've done what you can, like you mentioned the example of Allah sending assistance through the angels and whatnot, it's something, yeah, to be hugely mindful of. And I think it's also something that we can draw a lot of comfort from and ease, where it's almost like Allah's got your back, right? So we do our bit and rely upon Allah, and that's an easier mode of being than solely just relying on ourselves, or the opposite, like completely relying on Allah and not putting any effort in ourselves, because that's
Yeah. Yeah.
counter advice as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
SubhanAllah. So I just the next piece, and this is an interesting question. So we have on the chat: how do you let go of past wrongs or betrayals if there were no apologies or changes in behavior? And I can just extend this as well, and particularly what I've seen in the counseling context is, say, when an individual has a toxic trait, for example, like
Yeah.
narcissism, where they may be limited to be able to see, to even like recognize that they've made a fault, and they're constantly focused on the faults of others. That individual is likely possibly never to apologize or see a wrong, a change in their behavior. Definitely in the counseling space, it's one of the most difficult behavioral traits that can manifest in an individual. So if you know someone in your life who suffers from that, it's very challenging. But how can we understand that in an Islamic context, and particularly if that person isn't willing to apologize? What can we do?
Yeah, again, it depends on the nature of that relationship and what it is. Let's say it's a spouse or past. If it's someone of the past who isn't present in one's life now, but you're carrying that baggage, then it's a matter of knowing how to go through the process of forgiveness, because forgiveness isn't uttering the words. No different to saying "I love you" means that you love somebody. No different does it mean the opposite applies, that saying you forgive somebody does it also mean you forgive somebody. Something has to develop. There's a reality behind the word, like love can be shown through signs, for example, attachment and giving preference to that person, a couple of other signs. Similarly, forgiveness also has that. And so knowing that process, and we'll cover that again in the seminar, where actually we haven't been taught how to release a grudge, which isn't contingent on that person saying sorry or not, but actually coming to peace with ourselves. And so there's 4 degrees of how you can do that. We talk through those they're like meditative practices. And the power of that is that if you put yourself in that state, because you see, emotions are like, you could say they're temporary states. They come in and they go out. Ideally, they come in and they go out. So they're like a flow or like a river. And where we go wrong is we do 2 things. Either they come in and we act on them, and therefore we either do something damaging. So if envy comes in, I act on envy. That's very harmful. Or they come in and I don't know what to do with it, and I suppress it. And by suppressing it, it ends up either bottling up and coming out all at once, or it ends up installing within my character, meaning that more worse, it becomes part of me. So both responses are harmful: acting on it, suppressing it. So what we teach is how to channel those emotions towards something positive. So it's neither suppressed, but it's channeled in a way that it's like a wave. You ride the wave to something better, and that requires a skill. So in this case, someone's wronged you. Okay, we might have years of harboring those feelings and consolidating those wrongs. So we're in a state where we will have an emotional reaction if we come across them, or if they do anything further to us. So knowing how to unload that, and that's done through a few techniques. So one is meditative practices, which explain how to put yourself in a state where it becomes easier to forgive. One is very high level summary. One is to look at what you have in common with that person and see if you can make an excuse. Okay, in all cases you can't do that. So then you move on to the next one. Try to focus on the good of that person over their harmful traits, and see if the good outweighs the bad. Okay, in some cases you can't do that. Then the third is to look at your own faults. Okay, and what faults that you have, and in relation to God, how do you expect to be treated by God? Do you expect that your faults are overlooked? And if that's the case, it also becomes harder then to say, okay, I expect to be given 1,000 pardons, but I'm not going to give this person 1 pardon, because hypocritical. So then that also induces a state that it becomes easy to forgive. And then finally, if in absence of that, then actually meditatively thinking about what justice looks like. If justice means this person is being thrown into hell and you have the choice to throw them or not, would that give you the satisfaction that you're looking for? And for many of us, we're not looking for punishment of the person, we're looking for retribution, which is, we want something. If money's been taken from me, honor's been taken from me, I want that back. Or I want repayment, I want retribution. Whether the person has to suffer for that is another. Some of them draw retribution from that, but it never gives me. It doesn't give me my money back. It doesn't give me my health back. So that fourth state also can help as a last resort. And then there's obviously assigning it to the justice of God. So we talk about these meditative states, and we go through in a lot more detail. And we also talk about the mindset of a person who's the forgiver, because often we get mixed up with the idea that the forgiver is benefiting the one who needs forgiveness, but it's actually the other way around, that the forgiver is the beneficiary, that when you forgive, you're releasing the grudge, you're benefiting. It's like you're carrying an anchor with you, you're letting go of the anchor, so you've benefited. The person that you're forgiving benefits very little, because in absence of your forgiveness, they can still receive forgiveness from God, right? Ideally, obviously, requires your forgiveness, fine, but it's like the man who killed 99 people. He still received forgiveness. God didn't ask all 99 who'd passed away, do you forgive him? Obviously, they're passed. So it is possible, but the first mindset shift is the one forgiving is not doing that person a favor, you're doing yourself a favor. That's the first thing, because a grudge, and secondly is knowing how to not consolidate a grudge, which is to remind yourself constantly of, this person's done this to me. They might have defrauded you once, as an example, but if you remind yourself for 365 days a year, it will feel like they've defrauded you 365 times, just by the constant reliving of the experience. So knowing, how to release a grudge, and then also not how to consolidate it. Again, these are like some of the teachings that we cover. So we're going to cover a module on like the mindset of the forgiver. Like, what does it mean? How do you reframe forgiveness from a point of, I'm doing this person a favor, to actually you're doing yourself a favor. And secondly, we talk about the techniques of how to actually release a grudge and the signs of that you've forgiven somebody. Because, all right, you imagine you've done these practices. How do you know you've come to a point where you've forgiven them? And there's signs for that as well, which we touch on.
Mashallah. It's funny because I've often even heard the context of from the Muslim perspective, there are people that, for example, come back from like Hajj and Umrah, and you'd imagine like it's a clean slate. But even then, like for example, those mindsets you mentioned, if you haven't really like done the work, can you really expect it to just be a magic solution that's like this that that you don't carry on holding on to grudges, or you don't expect XYZ out of people? Because so I've seen some of these things play out as well, and someone could end up questioning, like, well, why didn't it work? Like, I went to Hajj, I went to Umrah.
Yeah, exactly.
It did, like it did, and it's not that it didn't work, it's that you've got to do the work in terms of like cleaning the mirror, or the lens in which to look at others through. And also you mentioned sort of mindsets and meditation. It's funny because I've heard in the non-Muslim space, right, they're really big on things like mindfulness, and professionals, CEOs like utilize this stuff to really, like, how do they deal with stress in a pressurized business environment to perform at the highest level. Thing is, like, we have this within Islam already, like 1400 years before they did.
Correct.
In the form of salah, dua, tafakkur, like reflection, contemplation. But yeah, so fascinating to hear that again will be one of the offerings that we'll have in the course. So another question: what should we do about relatives who never invite others to their events, for example, their home or weddings, yet always accept invitations to go to events? So almost we have this sort of thing around, it's almost like the relationship would die if because the other party, they're just takers instead of givers. So, and if I don't do anything to initiate something or to keep in touch, that relationship's just it's just me putting in the effort. Often I see that in the counseling context. Well, what's a good advice there?
Yeah, it reminds me of a story. That's why I was smiling, because it all determines on what you're doing, why you're doing it. Because to maintain good relationships, we do it because we do it for Allah. We don't do it because we want them to also cook dinner for us. Now, if they invited us over and reciprocated, that's great. That's nice for us. But we're not doing it for that, because then it's not really doing it for you're not doing it for Allah, you're doing it because you want something out of it. So it becomes transactional, and person does feel like, oh well, but I'm not getting anything out of it. So the first advice is, if you're feeling a bit like that, I'd say recorrect the intention. And if you're doing, let's say, I'm just making this up, like 10 invites a year, then reduce it to something more manageable, to 5. Yeah, because there is an aspect that if you're giving too much, then everyone should operate at the level that they feel comfortable at. So let's say that's too much for you, reduce it, and then that way you might feel like, okay, 5 is better than 10. 10 was too much. I don't feel like, they reciprocate. Okay, fine, I'm doing it for God, but then I'm going to reduce it down to 5. That's more comfortable for me. At least there's a relationship there. That's fine. So that's a practical, easy, adjustment that you can do, right? The second is very simple, which is it doesn't matter about the measure of whether we do something good or not is not determined by whether another person does something good or not. So because they are not our teachers, right? So I give somebody a favor and they don't do me a favor back. Well, does that mean I stop doing favors? Well, of course not. That's up to them. But I've benefited from giving that person a favor. So similarly, if you're inviting people, you're establishing a relationship, you're actually you're benefiting. On the outward, you might be like, oh, it's stressful to host people. Okay, but you're benefiting. And I give you a story. Once a woman in the Prophet ﷺ's time, she would complain to her husband that he would invite too many guests. So he then came to the Prophet ﷺ and said, look, my wife, she keeps complaining that, she doesn't like hosting people and people come round, and she's complained. What do I do? And the Prophet ﷺ says, okay, well, invite me. So he said, he was so surprised. He said, what? So he said, yeah, Rasulullah, we'd love to have you. So the Prophet came to the home, and he obviously told his wife, and his wife was happy and prepared and, made food. And the Prophet then attended the house, and, it was entertained as a guest. And then just before he left, he said to the companion that, as I leave, ask your wife to look and observe the door, to observe as I leave the house, observe what happens. And he said, okay, meaning see me to the door. And so as the Prophet leaves the house, the wife faints, as in she sees something and faints. And the man asked, what did you see, to the wife? And she said, I saw many scorpions and snakes and insects and creatures leaving our home as the Prophet ﷺ left. And when the man came to the Prophet of Allah and said, this is what she saw, the Prophet ﷺ said, yes, whenever you entertain a guest, the blessing and barakah of entertaining a guest is that when the guest leaves, he also takes with him the removal of problems and afflictions and calamities and issues that to befall the house, or are befalling the house, or currently in the house. So this was to teach a lesson that actually the opportunity to entertain guests is, it's a incredible blessing for the host. It's a incredible blessing for the host. And so, irrelevant of whether they host you, if they don't host you, that's bad for them. They're losing out. But if you're hosting, then alhamdulillah, you'll get more blessing and barakah. And because often we think when we do something, we want a reward, and we perceive reward as something in addition to what we have. Like, I get more money, I get this, but we never think about reward being the issues that we're not in. There's 99 issues. There's a million more problems that you're not in than the ones that you are in. So those are things that also require. Those are also blessings, that we don't have many problems outside the ones that we might have at the moment. There's a different way of thinking. It's a different way of thinking. And so for the person who's a host, don't that shift in perspective, as you mentioned earlier, Imran, it can completely change the way you're looking at it.
Yeah, subhanallah. It's fascinating as well, like sort of what you might physically perceive as being the situation versus what's happening spiritually, what we can't perceive, but where the barakah lies, right? Again, something I'm reminded of is like how dua is treated, right? Like one might make dua, and they might not see the results of that dua manifest in this physical world, right? But it may protect them from a harm. Will be weighing on their scales in the day of judgment. So again, stuff's happening in the background, but you're doing your bit, which is to keep making dua as opposed to stop. It's just a similar parallel.
Absolutely. That's a hadith of dua, that the dua is answered in the afterlife. or given to you in this life, or an equivalent problem is removed. So it means dua is always answered provided you follow the steps. So definitely, like it. That's why belief in the unseen is one tenet of our faith, meaning that without it, you're not considered a Muslim, because it's so intent. It's so pivotal in our understanding of our relationship with God, because that's a system of God as well that operates. And by the way, the secular world fully acknowledges this without the use of language of things like God or unseen, but they believe in the law of attraction, the idea that if you do something good, goodness comes back to you, or good karma. But they maybe don't believe it through a medium like angels, etc. They believe the universe does it. So it's all the same concepts and language. It's complete.
I've heard in my sort of counseling training, and so when you go through the secular training as well, they mention that there's this concept of, what does the universe intend for you? And then they just need to replace it with one word, which is God and Allah. But yeah, so just mindful of time, we'll take a last question. I'll try and sort of combine these two because it touches on a theme that we did sort of point towards. So maybe we can refer them to the course. But so how do you deal with people that play sort of cat and mouse? For example, they wrong you and apologize, but then repeat the cycle. Should you cut them off? And if not, sort of what to do? So that sounds a bit like what we mentioned around sort of like a personality trait in an individual, like a toxic trait. And the other sort of combined question is, how do you sort of let go of a friendship which might have turned sour after multiple attempts at resolution in a situation where the other person refuses to reconcile? So again, we like the theme of not recognizing their fault, repeating the mistake. This one's, by the way, a friendship, right, which you mentioned there's different degrees of relationship, family, friendship. That's probably the last question we'll take, and then we'll bring it to a close today.
Okay. So the friendship one is much easier, because I mentioned you differentiate family relations and friendship. Family relations you can't cut. Friendships you can distance yourself. For example, having bad company who destroy your life, you should leave them. Especially if it's bringing you to destructive behaviors like drugs, or so you can leave them. There's a wise way of doing it. It doesn't have to be done overnight, but there's no issue with that. Finding good company as a replacement. So let's say somebody's got destructive habits and you're not seeing eye to eye. Well, don't put firstly, the Prophet ﷺ says, a believer is never bitten by the same hole twice. So don't put yourself in a position of harm again with that friend, especially if they're repeating a behavior and they're not acknowledging that they have that behavior. So you keep at a distance, and you find good company to supplement that. Because unfortunately, friendships can come and can go, and sometimes people are on different maturity curves, and maybe you might outgrow somebody, and vice versa. So there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing un-Islamic about that. If anything, sticking with bad company or harmful company can be a detriment to you. It can cost you everything. And there are many examples of that in the seerah. Like there was this one companion, or he was a companion at the time, and then he flipped, which was he was friends with Abu Jahl, but he also was non-Muslim and he loved the Prophet. And one day the Prophet says to him, "Why don't you just convert?" And he says, "Yeah, sure, I'd love to." And he converts, but then Abu Jahl puts pressure on him and says, "Well, you can't be in the boys' club anymore, basically, and we're going to reprimand you and we're going to boycott you as well." And he said, "Well, no, I don't want that. What do I need to do to come back in?" He goes, "No, you can't come back in now." And they said, "Unless you go and spit on the messenger of God's face." And he said, "All right, fine, I'll do it." Now imagine this is a friend of the Prophet ﷺ who's just newly converted and gets peer pressured because he's got bad friends. He goes to the Prophet ﷺ, and as he spits, the wind blows back in his face, and he spits on his own face, and he dies in that state. Basically, he ends up dying. Somebody who rejected the messenger of God, and the Quran actually was revealed, or verses were revealed to mention him as an example of what his regret will be when he's resurrected about what he did. So he was on the doorstep to companionship, which is the highest possible rank, possible honor a person can have, to be in the physical company of the Prophet and die with belief. But even then, bad company took him away from that. So it shows, that's a bad company, or people who don't have bad or destructive habits or behaviors. So definitely distance yourself from friends is important, and that you can do that. There's nothing wrong with that. Do it with wisdom. Do it in a way that you're able to find a supplementary good company, etc. As for family, there's a limit to which you can distance yourself. So if that family is like immediate family, then yeah, keeping, like I mentioned earlier, physical distance, mental distance, spiritual distance, making sure those are in place, but not cutting the relationship entirely. So just keeping it to, salam dua, keeping it at a distance. There's nothing wrong with that. Where we go wrong is we try to force how we want the relationship to be. Maybe we were close and now we're not, and we keep trying to force it back to what it was, but actually maybe it was never meant to be that close, and there's nothing wrong with that. But as long as you don't cut the relationship entirely, then that's fine. Protect yourself, don't put yourself in that situation. And reality is, people who are blind to their habits or destructive habits, there's ways of benefiting from that. One is you can, just as much as you've experienced those habits, you can start to identify whether you have any destructive habits, because we all have blind spots, right? And the second is, if that person has, let's say, destructive habits, and they're unaware, then you should. It teaches you a lesson that actually you don't fit with people, right? Even family, even friends, you don't fit with them, and the only one that we were designed to fit with is God. That's the only being that will never wrong us, that always understands us, that it will be will be no reservation in forgiving us, is all appreciative. And this is a concept that we touch on in the course, which is how do we reprogram these expectations that we have, but towards God, because they clearly don't fit with humans. Like nobody I'm ever going to meet in my life is always going to accept me. We have very limited tolerance towards mistakes. We have very limited tolerance towards grievances. If someone's harmed me, okay, I can forgive them once, twice, but third, it'll be difficult for me. So whereas God is like, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions very clearly, if your sins reach the skies or the heavens or to cover the earth, there'll be no reservation. It's nothing for Allah, because they don't neither decrease or increase from any deed or sin that we do. So it's just a different ballgame with God. And that's when you start to see it from that perspective in terms of our expectations, then the relationship with God becomes more meaningful, and it frees you from everything else. It frees you from wanting these things from people. It doesn't mean you won't feel disappointment or you won't feel at loss with people, but it won't be to an extreme. If that makes sense. It won't debilitate you. So I hope that's covered both questions that have been answered. But again, we'll deep dive into this much more, Imran, on the course.
Sure. Jazakallah khair, Harun. So, alhamdulillah, some really fantastic questions that came in. I appreciate everyone who engaged and those who participated as well. So, as Harun mentioned, this is just a taster for the full day course we have at Regent University in about a couple of weeks on Saturday the 18th. Those who would like to, if this was a good insight, hopefully there was benefit in this that you can take away, practically implement for yourselves. If you'd like to do more of a deep dive, that option's available as well. So I'm just going to put it on the screen. Hopefully everyone can see this. Oh no, it didn't do it. So let's try it again. Bismillah. So there is a QR code you can scan. If that comes up, there we go. So there's a QR code you can scan, which gives you a link to the course registration, the workshop registration. Saturday the 18th, if you're free, from 10 till 5, Regent University in Central London will be running. So both Harun and myself will be training and delivering this particular course. It's £25, which is just for the whole day. There are many courses and self-development courses that charge a lot more. We're just sort of covering bases, like we mentioned, that the trainers don't take an income from any of this because we have professional jobs in our own right, alhamdulillah. But we want to share benefit, and hopefully like what you benefit from today, just to help cover the cost of the venue. And there is a discount. So for those who have attended today, we have a discount code. If you want to write it down, I'll put it in the chat as well. It's WL30. So WL, no points what that stands for, Wiselife, 30. So you're more than welcome to, I've just put that in the chat. I'm just going to pin it. But that is a special discount. If it's time limited, we'll sort of it's available for the rest of today until midnight. So if you would like to attend, 30% off, £25. If my maths is correct, it gives us £17.50. If you'd like to benefit and you found goodness in today, please come. Or if you know someone who would benefit, recommend it to a friend. If there was benefit from today, we will be running again another taster session next weekend. The details are yet to be confirmed, but if there's anyone that you know that if you found this really helpful, please share the link. Share the. We'll put out the messaging for next week's taster again, like today, and then the full day seminar as well. But yes, thank you everyone for your time. Jazakumullah khair. So we hope to stay in touch, to see you again soon. And until then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khair. I'll leave this on the screen just for a bit as people are dropping off. And the discount code is in the chat as well. Just to answer the question as well, as I see Shamim asked, will the seminar be online? This one is an in-person one, but we do offer online as well. So next weekend, we'll have another taster, which will be online like today. The one on the 18th will be in person. Jazakallah.